Kia ora everyone, my name's Zach, I love rugby, welcome back to Hakatime Rugby. It has been a while guys, but I am back making videos. Rugby Championship has started up obviously. It is week 1 and we are preparing for a Rugby World Cup, so it's time for old Hakatime Rugby to come back and give you guys my insights. So where I wanted to start is obviously the 2 dominant wins that we saw over the weekend in week 1 of the Rugby Championship. The All Blacks able to get a very, very good win over there in Mendoza against the Pumas, and the Springboks just completely dominant against the Wallabies in Pretoria. And, you know, looking at these scores, it just seems like there is just a separation in terms of the class in the Rugby Championship. Maybe that is true. That remains to be seen. And there was so much promise put in behind Eddie Jones, obviously the potential bounce back factor, and really getting Australian rugby back on a positive trajectory. Now that came thudding back down with a vengeance with that performance from the Springboks. I thought the Springboks were just completely dominant from start to finish. And there weren't many facets of the game that I thought Australia had real success in. And they did trial a number of things, and Eddie Jones is very well known for for being quite a, let's say, a risk taker, or at least he'll be very clear on the expectations and the various areas that he's expecting to be successful in. Sometimes those come off, sometimes they do not, and there was certainly some of those selections that he made here which just did not come off in what was a very hostile arena there in Pretoria. So the Springboks completely dominant in, as I say, every facet of the game, and similarly for the All Blacks, although there was very much a bit of fight back there in the second half from the Pumas. But make no mistake, at halftime in that All Blacks game, the game was essentially over. 31-0 at halftime to the All Blacks, looking extremely dominant. One of the more complete performances that we've seen from the All Blacks in recent years. And they weren't able to go on and do it, into the second half. The Pumas were able to take the score more points in the second half than the All Blacks actually. So getting the victory in the second half, you want to look at it that way. But very much a professional performance from the All Blacks. Now, a lot will be made about the selections in these two teams as well. So there was talk of there being, the Springboks B team, or at least the split squad system in place. I thought that was very fascinating. We saw what we expected from the Springboks forwards. Forward domination, set-piece domination, go forward with ball in hand, great work at the breakdown, and dominating the collision. We expect that, but we just saw a bit more variation, I thought, from the backline with the likes of Libbok in there. Esterhausen played a fantastic game. He really is a damaging ball runner when he gets his opportunities. Curtly Arendse is knocking right on the door in terms of the top selections, top teams. For him to score that hat-trick was just incredible. And Willie Leroux slotting there at the back, just professional as ever. And I thought shouldered a lot more of the load from a game management perspective in terms of tactical kicking and general play around the park. Contrast that to the likes of Damien McKenzie coming in and getting a start. Now, we all know that Richie Mo'unga is very much seen as the number one fly half for the All Blacks. But then we got Damien McKenzie coming in, asking some questions, looking really, really good with ball in hand and shouldering a lot of the game management, I thought, in that first half. It's hard to really tell exactly where we're at in terms of who is better, because we saw a forward pack going forward, dominating at the collision, dominating at the breakdown, dominating at the set piece. And the job for a fly half becomes so much easier when you're playing behind a dominant forward pack. So, hard to separate these two results. Hard to know who, I guess, had the better of the two results. But I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the, let's say, exchanges throughout the various games. And just to see if we can find some nuggets that give us clues on who might have had the more professional, the better performance, and who was probably building more succinctly for the Rugby World Cup. So, let's look at a couple of areas. Firstly, the match summary. Probably the biggest takeaway from here for me. As I touched on, Curtly Arendse scores 3 tries. That's a huge result. Just complete strike there on his wing. Up against Vunivalu, who had a night to forget. So, certainly an experiment that I don't think they'll be repeating. He looked all out at sea, and Arendse was very much able to take advantage of that. The other major input in this view is there were 2 penalty tries, and that is just pure reward for effort. The Springboks were able to put the Wallabies under immense pressure, and as a result, the Wallabies were continually giving away penalties, and that led to penalty tries. So this just highlights that real strike there on the left wing for the Springboks with Kurt Liarense. As I mentioned, he is going to really knock at the door in terms of the top team, and it just further exemplifies that positive, dominant, forward, physical battle, which resulted in 2 penalty tries. Contrast that to the All Blacks' 7 tries in what I thought was just a great mix of, back into play, forwards handling. There were some great exchanges where short passes from Shannon Frizzell to Scott Barrett, to Dane Coles, who was able to score that first try, or whether it's a driving maul to score try, Savia scoring close to the line, Aaron Smith scoring close to the line, just a real exchange of different types of variation from the All Blacks. And seeing that variation I thought was really, really interesting. Coming back to variation for the Springboks, obviously in terms of the style of the Springboks, it's very much a forward-dominated kick-first type mentality. But what we're seeing with some of these younger guys coming into the fold is that we're getting a lot more balanced. And I think they're finally starting to unlock something there for the Springboks. Play direct and play to your strengths with dominant physical battle, but when the opportunities arise, spread it wide and have a go. I still thought they kicked away possession a little bit too often, but they show that they have the talent out on the edges to really be able to trouble some of the best teams. So we'll continue to watch that in terms of whether or not they really try to continue that style, or if they revert back to the old Springboks, which won the Rugby World Cup, very much in that forward-dominated style. That remains to be seen, but there is a real opportunity for evolution from the Springboks, and I think they showed some of that in this game. Now, touching on a couple of other parts, let us jump over to the set play. I actually thought in terms of scrums and lineouts, and the scrums were just, it was a Stephen Kitsoff masterclass, it was an Ethan de Groot masterclass. And both of these guys were just dominant. And it was interesting watching Kitsoff. It just looked like he had the advantage, the upper hand in many of those exchanges with Alan Alatoa. He was just dominating him, bearing him into the ground, having him extend in the scrum, and being off his base, and then was therefore able to press his advantage. So it was just a number of different ways that I saw that he was able to get on top of Alan Alatoa, and it just looked like a tactical masterclass. Translate to de Groot's performance, and that looked very much different, although equally as dominant. And what I saw is it was very much a bully-like approach. Just the bigger, stronger man imposing his will in many different ways and just bearing the opposition. He was just constantly on top, pushing forward, and able to get many penalties from the scrum. So that's reflective in the set play stats that we see here. You can see very much, probably the Springboks went to that weapon, the scrum weapon, more. Whereas the All Blacks, when they did have their opportunities, were able to capitalise, get penalties, and very convincingly win those scrum exchanges. One area I think we are seeing some separation here. Australia actually had some success on the lineouts, which is traditionally a big strength of the Springboks. But there were some lineouts that were won against the throw by the Wallabies. They were able to compete and at times get success. On the other side, the All Black lineout was very, very dominant against the Pumas, I should say. So they're able to steal more of the ball, retain more of the ball, and just look like a real attacking weapon there. A number of tries actually came off the lineout, which was just, it became a real attacking weapon for the All Blacks. So if I look at the scrums, or the set piece in total, I think very much it's shared in terms of the scrum dominance. Both teams had outstanding dominance there in the scrums. But I think in terms of the lineouts, which is quite a surprise, I'd give that the edge to the All Blacks over the Springboks in that one. They had better success with their own ball, better success at disrupting the opposition ball, and I think it's really set up for a great battle this weekend between the Springboks and the All Blacks to see who has the better advantage when we see some of those bigger names coming back for the Springboks as well. A couple of other areas that we can look at. Let's talk about the performances of the strike weapons. So I spoke a little bit about Esterhuizen, Arendse, Moody, and LaRue versus Geordie Barrett, who's playing there at 12, Caleb Clark, Narawa, and Bowden Barrett, who's playing 15. Now, in terms of pure strike, it's very difficult to assess. I thought that the edges probably favoured the likes of the Springboks. I thought Arance and Moody just seemed to have the number in attack, particularly of Vunivalu, as I mentioned. So they looked a lot better, and I thought Willie le Roux was just a great axis for game management for those two absolute lightning players. So really, really good mix there. Whereas on the other side, Geordie Barrett, Reko Ioane, who was just having a field day there in that wide centre channel, Narawa and Clark probably didn't get as many opportunities as they would like, although neither put a foot wrong, and Beauden Barrett was very lethal in attack. So in terms of the strike weapons and who had the better, I would say that probably the Springboks had the better of the strike, the pure strike. But in saying that, it's marginal. Both teams were fantastic with the ball in hand, out wide, through the middle, through their attacking weapons. Now, when I look at McKenzie versus Libbok, this was a very, very interesting contrast, I should say. Libbok, as we know, he is behind Andre Pollard, so he may be sort of relegated to more of that sort of second player type approach. Damien Willemse probably stays on the bench if they're looking at that 6-2 split. We may not have a role there in the top 23 for Libbok, but if required, if called upon, he will certainly do a job. Damien McKenzie, on the other hand, he is really knocking on the door, I think, in terms of top team selection. I thought he looked professional. I thought he looked dangerous. I thought his game management was great. And as we know, Richie Mo'unga comes under a lot of criticism for maybe being a Super Rugby specialist. It's going to be very interesting how they go from here in terms of that selection between Beauden Barrett, who I think is very firmly in that third spot, Richie Mo'unga, and Damien McKenzie. I think McKenzie asked enough questions that he deserves another shot. I wouldn't say that he is in a position that he can surpass Richie Mo'unga as that starting 10 just yet, but he is right there. And with a couple of good games, it would be very hard to deny him. He was the best player in Super Rugby this year. He had a great performance there first up for the All Blacks. He is worth persevering with. It will be interesting to see how he goes as a player on the back foot. If the All Blacks start to get dominated by some of these bigger packs, South Africa, even Ireland with their speed at the ruck, as well as France, how will he perform on the back foot? To my eye, he looks to have more time and more space in terms of decision making. Mo'unga can be put under pressure and in a backwards momentum from the forwards. So Damien McKenzie seems to be someone who could handle that a little bit better right now, but we really need to see him put under some pressure to see if that is true and if he deserves that spot at number one. But between those two, I thought Damien McKenzie had the better of the outing because a lot of that game management deferred to Willie le Roux when it came to the Springboks. So I've covered a number of different areas. Both teams had extremely dominant performances, as I mentioned, and it remains to be seen on who we thought had the better of the overall performances. Now, the good news is we're going to find out in a week's time because these two teams play very, very soon. And the Springboks did a great approach to that game by having the split squads that very much played into their hands. Now they've got a number of players that will be fresher than the All Blacks going back to New Zealand. And that could be a masterstroke from Rassie Erasmus and from Ninaba. So, with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed the first round of the Rugby Championship. Let me know what you thought in terms of those results. Who do you think had the better of the results between these two teams? And who is going to win this upcoming game? I'll give you my prediction this week once we see the team lineups later in the week, because I think it's all going to come down to who they select and where those strengths lie as a result of those team namings. With that, guys, I'm going to go. It's great to be back, and I hope to put out more videos like this for you guys soon. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.